Hello, everybody. This is Friday Night 3. Welcoming you back to another one of my NFL Fantasy League top 10 lists. And this time, since we're doing wide receivers, we're going to make an exception and make this my top 20. Now, of course, probably the biggest reason why you're wondering I'm doing 20 is because, well, simply put, there's too many good wide receivers out there, and you need more than just two on a team at any given point throughout your fantasy season. So that's why it's the best idea in order to get yourself those particular guys. You're going to want to seek out all of these wide receivers and see if they're available. Of course, I'll give an example of one that I think is not a good idea for you to pick up, and then go through the list, and afterwards a few honorable mentions that could potentially be good backups as well. All right, so without further ado, how I'm going to go ahead and sort this out, I'm going to do team by team for whose wide receivers that I'm actually going to be utilizing. So first one that I'm going to actually point out, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people are actually going to be thinking I'm just completely against the Patriots because this is the second time I'm using them, but I mean, it is what it is. Julian Edelman, wide receiver for the New England Patriots. Simply put, as I mentioned before when I was creating the running backs video, you can never tell what kind of an offense the Patriots will be utilizing and if they're going to be utilizing more of their defense. So that being the case, you can never truly predict what they're going to be doing. Julian Edelman can, for a fact, produce. There's no question about that. And he's definitely going to be their wide receiver number one. The biggest problem is the fact that Julian just is used, but not every single game. He's not 100% reliable. And then there's also the possibility of getting, injured. And he has been oft injured, unfortunately, so that could have a factor in there. But the main reason I would stick away from Julian Edelman, maybe use him as a backup, simply is because you never know what the Patriots are going to be doing week to week. When it comes to these wide receivers, you know for a fact that they're going to be utilized every single game. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on the list. First up, we're going to go ahead and work from west to east, just to make things a little bit easier for me on top of everything. So, first team we're going to be taking a look at is going to be the Oakland Raiders. And there's really only one person on that team that's worth looking at, and I'm pretty sure everyone can already guess who it is, and that would be wide receiver Antonio Brown. Superstar wide receiver, can make just about any contested catch you can ask him to. He can be double covered, still going to get the ball. A lot of good yards after the catch, a lot of good yards after contact. This is somebody that has been a superstar wide receiver ever since he was in the league. He is really good, of course, with returns, but he hasn't been utilized that much back in Pittsburgh. Now with Oakland, you never know with Jon Gruden. The only thing that I can for a fact guarantee is that Antonio Brown will for a fact be the big producer out of Oakland that's going to get you yards, gonna get you touchdowns, and definitely going to be giving you points in your fantasy league. He is still a preliminary wide receiver that you're going to be wanting to pick. Next, we're going to move over to the Los Angeles Rams. And with this one, it's basically a pick your poison, but I'm only going to be utilizing two out of this team because they've been the most consistent from everything that I've seen so far. Those two would be wide receivers Brandin Cook and wide receiver Cooper Kupp. Brandin Cook has the speed, he has the hands, he is someone that is always utilized and can burn cover very, very easily. And when it comes to Cooper Kupp, if it wasn't for the fact that he tore his ACL earlier last year and was able to make it into the Super Bowl, the Rams offense would look completely different. That was Jared Goff's go-to guy, and that is going to be his go-to guy this upcoming season. He's the perfect slot machine. If you want someone that's going to guarantee you every single week production, Cooper Kupp is the man. Brandin Cooks can produce you some big points out of nowhere. Next, we're going to head out over to the desert. And this is going to be from the Arizona Cardinals, wide receiver Larry Fitzgerald. It doesn't matter who's throwing him the ball. It doesn't matter how the team looks. It doesn't matter how much they may use the run. Larry Fitzgerald produces year in, year out. It's almost like he's the most ageless wide receiver you can ask for. He is someone that can still make plays despite how long he's been playing in this league. He's been playing longer than almost any other wide receiver. And that's saying a lot too, because these wide receivers, they can get really battered and they retire early most of the time. Larry Fitzgerald, he's been given, what is it now, the third one-year contract in a row from the Cardinals? It's all because he can still produce. And on a consistent basis too. Not to mention, he has a very, very small injury history. This is someone that is still a guarantee to this day. You want to pick him up, especially with a Cardinals offense that's going to be featuring new quarterback Kyler Murray and is still developing rookies Christian Kirk, and on top of that, Hakeem Butler and Andy Isabella. Yes, I know Kirk is a sophomore now, but even still, he's not 100% developed simply because he lost most of the season through injury. Fitzgerald hasn't. Fitzgerald's still producing. You are going to want to get him because he's still going to be Murray's number one target. Next up, we are going to move over to, and you're probably going to be surprised that I'm actually skipping the Kansas City Chiefs. That's because Sammy Watkins, I'm not 100% sure about. Mecole Hardman, he's a rookie. And then when it comes to Tyreek Hill, who would be the obvious number one, I'm still not 100% sure what's going to happen to him in regards to the NFL's investigation. So I'm going to leave the Chiefs alone on that one. So instead, we're going to go ahead and go to the Houston Texans. And they also have two wide receivers. DeAndre Hopkins is obviously number one because he's been producing 1,000-yard seasons with, I've already lost count how many quarterbacks the Texans have already had, but the fact that he has a reliable one with Deshaun Watson, it showed last year. A full year with Watson, Hopkins was one of the best wide receiving producers you can ask for. And what I've also noticed is it never mattered who the quarterback was. He was one of the first wide receivers picked off on the board every single fantasy year, and he's going to be again this year. If you got an early pick, you are going to want to hunt down Hopkins, no questions asked. The other one on the team would be Will Fuller V. And you'll be a little surprised that I choose him because of his injury history, but you never know when he is going to be injured, if it happens. But if he's not injured, Fuller is the best compliment you can ask for to Hopkins. Will Fuller will produce almost exactly as much as Hopkins can on the field. Sometimes Fuller actually gets more, sometimes a little less, but they're so even with each other that if you were able to get them both, man, you would be really set for your fantasy leagues. Next up, we go over to the Dallas Cowboys, and there's only one receiver on that team to look at, and that's going to be Amari Cooper. I mean, I think it spoke for itself how, what a big switch around it was in the Dallas Cowboys offense when they picked up Amari Cooper from the Raiders last year in that trade. Cooper became that third piece of the offense that complements their overpowered defense so well that the Cowboys are definitely going to be making a playoff push. If anything, they may actually be able to win the division. Nonetheless, though, Amari Cooper is going to be a number one receiver that is going to help this team a lot, and it's highly suggested that you go after him if you have the chance to. Next up, we are going to go up to Minnesota to the Minnesota Vikings, and we're going to go with not one but two over there as well. We are going to be taking a look at Stefon Diggs and Adam Thielen. We got Stefon Diggs, who is the number one receiver there because he just knows how to catch any football thrown to him. He is amazing. He will guarantee you points in your fantasy league, and with Adam Thielen, he's definitely going to, because there's always going to be someone on both of them, but they can never get double covered because you never know which one's being targeted if it's going to be a pass. They are hard to cover, and they can even catch contested balls. So it's like, you don't got a chance if you're a defensive end. So Stefon Diggs is definitely great. Adam Thielen, the fact that he actually tied Calvin Johnson Jr.'s record for the most consecutive games with at least 100 receiving yards. Yeah, Adam Thielen is definitely somebody that you're going to want to pick, and he was doing that against some of the better defenses in the league too. Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, you get one, great. You get both, you're going to be very hard to defeat in regards to wide receiver points, of course. Next up, we will go over to and yes, I am skipping the Green Bay Packers because I don't believe Davante Adams is going to be as good this year as he could have been. So instead, we're going to go over to the Indianapolis Colts, and there's only one wide receiver there, and that's T.Y. Hilton. He's the most obvious choice you can ask for. He's been Andrew Luck's number one receiver every single year, and he outproduces all wide receivers on that team almost by double the amount in any category by himself. T.Y. Hilton is a nightmare for defenses. He will score on you, and he will score for you if you pick him. Now we're going to move over to the Chicago Bears, and this one's going to be a little interesting. And this one that I'm picking, you're probably going to think Allen Robinson. Nope. Taylor Gabriel. Nope. Who am I picking? Cordero Patterson. Now, that may come as a shock until you actually look at what Patterson can do, and if you paid attention to what the Patriots did with him last year. Cordero Patterson is not just a great receiver in a sense, he's a great returner, but he can double as a running back. And when I mean as a running back, this is a tall man that is plowing through defenses as if he was, let's say, Frank Gore or something. Cordero Patterson can double as a runner and as a receiver for a team that is going to be utilizing trick plays so often under Matt Nagy's coaching, and with Mitchell Trubisky and potentially Tariq Cohen throwing the balls to all the receivers, they trick play so much. Even Cordero Patterson may be throwing a touchdown. You never know. So I would suggest you to get Patterson simply because in the scheming of the Bears offense, he's somebody that's definitely going to be used more often than anyone thinks. It was one of the smartest offseason moves that I saw. Next up, we are going to take a look at the New Orleans Saints. And the only receiver there that I'm going to mention is obviously Michael Thomas. I mean, Drew Brees is great, and Michael Thomas just shows how great he is. Michael Thomas is an outstanding receiver. I mean, the Saints have had some good receivers in the past, but I think Thomas is their number one that they've ever had, period. He produces insane numbers and is one of the most reliable set of hands that you can ask for. DeAndre Hopkins last year did not drop a single pass. Michael Thomas was right behind him. Michael Thomas was right behind him when it came to reliability. You want reliable hands, and Michael Thomas gives you that without question. Now we move over to the Cincinnati Bengals. The only receiver that I'm definitely going to mention there is A.J. Green, consistently a 1,000-yarder for each season, even with such mediocre play from Andy Dalton and the rest of the Cincinnati Bengals offense. And now under Zach Taylor, we don't know how that's going to necessarily work since he's a new coach, but A.J. Green is still going to produce. That's a guarantee. Of course, if he gets injured, then, well, that could be an issue, but for the time being, A.J. Green is still one of the most, what's the word I'm looking for, recommended receivers that I can actually give to anybody. Now, we're going to go over to the Cleveland Browns. Now, I know everyone is going to predict me saying Odell Beckham Jr., and yes, you're correct. Beckham is definitely going to produce with Baker Mayfield and Freddie Kitchens as a coach. And with the rest of that Cleveland offense, Odell is obviously going to be the star right out the gate. So, yeah, go ahead and go after Odell. If he's the first pick in any fantasy league, I'm not going to be surprised. But also keep an eye on his running mate, Jarvis Landry. because now that the LSU products are back together on the same team with a high-flying offense like this, it's going to be just like the Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen situation. If one person is double covered, the other one's going to be singled, and they're going to be able to get the contested ball or the wide open catch because they're going to burn the defense. It's going to be either Odell is double covered, which is probably going to be the most highest probability, or it's going to be Jarvis Landry who's going to be double covered. And even in those cases, they can still end up getting the ball anyway. Jarvis Landry is an amazing catcher. Odell's an amazing catcher. If you, by some miracle, manage to get them both on your fantasy league, I don't want to be your opponent. Let me just say that right there. Next, we will move over to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the only wide receiver recommendation over there is obviously going to be Juju Smith-Schuster. Juju can produce. That's all I got to say right there. 1,000-yard season, even with Antonio Brown on the opposite side. Juju is a young receiver who is still climbing that ladder. He is still not at his peak yet. He is in his prime, and this is going to be a serious season for him now that Antonio Brown hasn't, unfortunately, left for another team. You're going to want Juju on your team, without question. That's all I can say. Now, we're going to move over to the Philadelphia Eagles, and this is the only team on my list that has 3 receivers that I'm going to recommend. The first receiver I'm recommending is to get Nelson Agholor. And why is that? Well, that's a big playmaker right there. He goes deep, and he is getting that ball. And he is quick, too. You want someone that's going to be giving you a lot of production throughout the year. Agholor is going to, because Wentz will rely on him a lot. But on the other hand, you have Deshaun Jackson, who they got in a trade from the Buccaneers. If you remember, last year, Deshaun Jackson was actually the number 1 receiver for the most yards per catch, 17.8. You put in that factor that he was receiving the balls from both Ryan Fitzpatrick and Jameis Winston in a messy offense. Now put him in a cleaner offense with a more reliable quarterback in Carson Wentz, and his production is going to go through the roof. Deshaun is probably going to be actually a big sleeper for a lot of people, and if he's not picked up, then you're going to reap a lot of reward with him. That goes without saying. And then the third receiver on that team that I can highly recommend is going to be Alshon Jeffrey. The only problem is that there are a lot of times where Jeffrey is not relied on. So, yeah, I said there would be 3 Eagles, but he's more of the very, very edge of the top 20. So, if you see Jeffrey and you want him, get him. He's still going to be a very great producer because he is a reliable catcher. But keep the asterisk near his name because you never know which game that the other receivers are going to be used more than he is. Especially with Zach Ertz on that team too. Now we go all the way down to the Atlanta Falcons. Julio Jones is the only name that I'm even going to put on that list simply because, I mean, why would you put anybody else? Mohamed Sanu Sr., great football player. Calvin Ridley, he's going to have a great sophomore season. But I can't see a good enough reason to put either of them in the top 20. But when it comes to Julio Jones, he deserves it without question. Julio Jones is an amazing receiver who can consistently produce for you no matter what. And now, the last wide receiver on my list, the top 20 wide receivers, is going to be from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as I previously mentioned that team, Mike Evans. Inconsistent quarterback play, inconsistent quarterback rotation, and yet this guy can still produce 1,000-yard seasons. He can still burn cover. He can still make hard contested catches. Mike Evans is a beast. This is someone that you need on your team. If you do not have Mike Evans, you are screwed if he is on your opponent's team. That's all I can say about him. Unless, of course, it's during the Tampa Bay's bye week, in which case, then you're okay. So that's my top 20. And now here are the few honorable mentions. I'm definitely going to put on this list DK Metcalf simply because even though he's just a rookie, ever since Doug Baldwin was released from the Seahawks due to the failed physical because of the preliminary injuries that are going to probably force him to retire, DK, to me, feels like the up-and-comer that's going to beat Tyler Lockett for the wide receiver 1 position, not out the gate, but eventually. But until then, we can't guarantee that, so I'm not going to include him on such a high list. And what I explained with Alshon Jeffrey from the Eagles would be my same reasoning behind Robert Woods of the Rams. He's great, but he's kind of somebody that's more relied on when the other top receivers are not available. So I'm going to be precautious with Woods. He's a good backup for you to have just in case anybody on your team happens to be injured, or if he's a free agent during your fantasy league season. Other ones on the list that I'll definitely include would be Keenan Allen, Mike Williams from the Chargers, Marquise Goodwin from the 49ers. Those three can all definitely be producers, but the inability to actually predict who's going to actually be the consistent producer is the biggest problem why they weren't on the list. I'll also add on to there Adam Humphries and Corey Davis from the Titans, simply because they're great at producing yards after catch. They are really good receivers, but in the Titans' offensive scheme, it's more likely that they could be run heavy, and that's why it's very precautionate with them. So that's just quite a few of the honorable mentions that I can definitely make. But in the meantime, these are my top 20 of the best wide receivers that you can definitely try to get. If Tyreek Hill ends up being available to actually pick up, and he's not suspended the entire season, then it would be recommended to get him once he becomes available. Kind of similar to the whole Kareem Hunt situation with the Browns. But we have to wait until we find out what the NFL decides to do with him. But in the meantime, those are my top 20 wide receiver picks. Let me know what you think in the comments. In the meantime, this is Fire Night 3, signing out.